The first question. Bhagwan, when such incredible happiness descends, why do I feel so unworthy? Abhyana, it's natural, because that which descends has nothing to do with your effort. It is a grace. It is a gift from God. And the gift is so big, so huge, so enormous. It is natural to be overwhelmed. It is like a flood, as if the ocean has descended in the dewdrop. How can one feel worthy? You have not earned it. It has nothing to do with your effort, your doing, your practicing. It has simply come to you for no reason at all. Hence one feels dumb, lost, in such a awe that breathing stops, that the heart beats no more. The whole world stops. Whenever it happens to anybody, the same is the experience, the feeling of great unworthiness. But it is beautiful. It will give you a depth in humbleness. Slowly, slowly, the ego will be eroded. And sooner or later, you will find, with your effort, with your worth, only small things are possible. All great things happen. They cannot be done. And they happen for no reason at all. Remember it. The beauty of the sunset, the song of a bird, a small lonely flower, the moon. There is no reason for it at all. Nobody can answer why it is there, why the rose is so beautiful, and why this existence exists at all, and why with such tremendous grace, harmony, the universe moves. There is no reason at all. Hence, I say it is a mystery. And it remains a mystery even for those who have gone deep into it, who have become dissolved into it. It is never demystified. But you are fortunate, Abhyana, that those moments have started happening. Don't be shy to receive them. Don't be embarrassed. It is natural in the beginning to feel unworthy. Slowly, slowly, that grace will transform you. Those moments will come more and more. They will become natural. They will become a shadow to you. Where you will be, they will be there. Waking, asleep, you will find that grace surrounding you. That grace will be without and within. That grace will become a luminous point within your heart, and the flame will go on burning. But remember, don't become too much worried about your unworthiness. If you become too much worried about your unworthiness, those moments will start disappearing because your focus has changed. Rather than feeling unworthy and becoming focused on it, feel the compassion of God and become focused on it. Remember, these are two different gestalts. Both are possible. The unintelligent will become too much concerned about his unworth and will start denying those moments. How those moments can happen when I am so unworthy? It must be my imagination. It must be a trick of the mind. I must be getting crazy. And you will become convinced by your own logic that those moments are not true. You have to prove them untrue. Because you are so focused on your unworth. If they are true, then you are not unworthy. And your society has been teaching you that you are unworthy. You have been told that you are of no use. You are utterly worthless. You are nothing but dust, dust unto dust. You are more worthless than dirt. That's what has been told to you in so many ways. It has become a deep rooted idea in you. If you pay too much attention to it, the only possibility is you will deny those moments. And I know many people who have denied when the mysterious has knocked on their doors, just because they cannot leave the idea of their unworth. Then the only possibility is to deny those moments, call them imaginary, hallucinations, dreams, deceptions. Something must have gone wrong in your head. You are going berserk. And forget all about them because they remind you of your unbirth. Don't become focused on it. Be focused on the compassion of God. That's why all the religions emphasize God is compassionate, Rahim, Rahman. God is compassion. This is just to give you an alternative gestalt. So you become focused on His compassion, not on your unworth. You may be unworthy, that is irrelevant, but God is compassionate. You may be a sinner, that is irrelevant. God is compassionate. He gives for no reason at all. He is simply a giver. He knows only giving. And He does not give conditionally. He gives unconditionally. Jesus tells again and again a parable. A rich man called forth few laborers in the morning to work in his garden. The fruits were becoming ripe, and they had to be collected soon. But by the afternoon it was felt that the laborers are not enough. More are needed. So more laborers were called. By the evening it was felt that even these laborers are not enough. Few more are needed. And they were called. And when the third group of laborers came, the sun was almost setting. And then it was night, and the laborers were called, and the rich man gave them exactly the same amount to everybody. Those who had come in the morning, and those who had come in the afternoon, and those who had just come and has not worked at all. They were also given the same amount of money. Naturally, the people who had been working the whole day in the hot sun complained. They were angry. They said, this is unjust. These people have just come. They have not done anything at all. And they receive the same amount of money. And few people have come in the middle of the day. They have done only half of the work. And they receive also the same amount of money as we have received. This is unfair. And the wealthy man laughed and he said, answer me one question. What I have given to you, is not it enough for your labor that you have done? They said, it is more than enough. But what about others? And the rich man said, you need not worry about others. I give them not because they have worked. I give them because I have too much to give. I am burdened. Can't I give my money to anybody, whomsoever I want to give? Can't I throw my money to the winds? You have received your worth. You have received because you worked. They are receiving because I have so much to give. This is a very strange parable. Except Jesus, nobody has told such a thing. Jesus is saying that those who are working hard, those who are cultivating culture, virtue, character, those who are practicing austerities, the doers, they will also receive. They will receive according to what they have done. But lovers will also receive, who have not cultivated any virtue, who have not cultivated any austerity, who had simply lived and rejoiced, who have simply prayed, who are not great saints, who may even be known as sinners in the world. They will also receive, and the same amount, because God is compassion. This is something of immense value that Jesus has said. He has opened the doors of grace for people. That's what is happening to you, Abhiyana. Not because you have done anything special to attain it, but because God has so much. He goes on showering to anybody who is receptive. And my work here is to help you to become receptive. My function here is not to teach you how to attain to God, but to teach you that when God comes, how to receive Him. And He comes. And He comes every day. And He comes every moment. Just you are not in a receptive mood. Hence you go on missing. It is not according to your saintliness that you will receive him. It is according to your emptiness, receptivity, humbleness. You cannot earn God. It is always a gift. And whenever it comes, you will feel unworthy. And it is good to feel unworthy, but don't become focused on it. Don't become obsessed by it. Feeling unworthy, emphasize God's compassion. Feeling unworthy, see the beauty. That the gift is unconditional. That you cannot claim it, yet it has been given to you. You have heard Jesus' famous statement, knock and the doors shall be opened unto you. Ask and it shall be given. Seek and ye shall find. Once Rabia, a Sufi woman mystic, was passing and she saw Hassan, another Sufi, praying in the mosque with great fervor, tears rolling down his cheeks, hands raised to the sky. He was crying and weeping and saying to God, come, open the doors, let me in. This was very usual with Hassan, almost everyday ritual 5 times a day. And he was doing it very sincerely. It was not just a ritual, not a mere ritual. His heart was in it. He was a man of great qualities. And Rabia had heard him many times. And whenever she heard, she smiled, laughed and went on her way. But today, she went close to Hassan, shook him. Hassan looked at her and Rabia said, how long you are going to do it? I tell you, the doors are open. You need not ask him again and again when you will open the doors. Don't be foolish. Enough is enough. I have heard enough of all this nonsense. The doors are open. Just open your eyes and see. Rabia's statement goes far deeper than Jesus' statement. Jesus says, knock and the doors shall be opened. Rabia says, open your eyes. The doors are already open. And I am saying to you, God is already coming. God has come. He is standing on your doors. Open your doors. Open your eyes. Just open your heart. And certainly, when God's energy will shower on you, how can you feel you are worthy? Impossible. The gift is so big, as if somebody has given a Kohinoor diamond to a beggar. He cannot believe. He must think it must be an artificial thing. Or maybe somebody is kidding. I am a beggar. Who can give me the Kohinoor diamond? Impossible. Maybe I am dreaming. Maybe I am gone mad. This is an ordinary stone. I am projecting. That's what happens to everybody when God comes in. But don't become focused on it. Become focused on God's overflowing energy. God is overflowing energy. God is overflowing joy. God is Satchidanand. Overflowing truth, overflowing consciousness, overflowing bliss. Just whenever you are ready, receptive, it is going to happen. It could happen any time. No time was wrong time. No time was unripe time. Just for one single reason it could not happen, because you were not open. And if you become obsessed with your unworth, you will become closed again. It is natural abhiyana, but look at the compassion. Look at the friendliness of existence. Look its acceptance of you, whoever you are, wherever you are. It makes no difference between the saints and the sinners. God is available to everybody. The second question, Bhagwan, why do I go on forgetting myself? Gyandeva, it is an ancient habit for many, many lives. You have practiced it. You have put much energy into it, in forgetting yourself. You remember money. You remember others. You remember the world. To remember all these things which Taoists call 10,001 things. If you want to remember these 10,001 things, you will have to forget yourself. Because your eyes will be focused on things, on people, on the world. And of course you will fall in the shadow. It is a long, long habit. Just a habit. You are there. You can turn in. But turning in seems to be difficult because your neck has become paralyzed. For how many lives you have remained in this forgetfulness? Now suddenly you want to remember. At the most for 1 or 2 seconds you can remember. Again you will forget. But those 1 or 2 seconds open the doors of hope. Don't be worried. If you can remember only for a single moment, that's enough. The key is with you. You are never given more than a single moment at a single time. You are never given 2 moments together. If you can remember for a single moment, that's enough. The key is there. Now you can work it out. After this moment is gone, another moment will be given to you. And you know how to be alert, aware in a single moment. Be alert and aware in that. Remember, you will forget many times, but don't feel repentant. Otherwise, one starts feeling guilty and creates complexities which don't help, which in reality hinders. If you forget, so what? For millions of lives you have been forgetting. Accept it. And the moment you remember that you have forgotten, good that you have remembered again. Remember. You will forget again. When you forget, forget. When you remember, remember. But don't make much of a problem out of it. Slowly, remembering more and more. By and by, gradually, the forgetfulness, the habit will be broken. Mrs. McMahon went berserk one afternoon. She broke every dish and cup and reduced her usually spotless kitchen to shambles. The police arrived and took her to the city's mental institution. The head psychiatrist sent for her husband. "Do you know any reason?" asked the shrink. "Why your wife should suddenly lose her mind?" "I am just as surprised as you are," answered Mr. McMahon. "I can't imagine what got into her. She has always been such a quiet, hard-working woman. Why? She has not been out of the kitchen in 20 years. How many lives you have not been out of the kitchen? How many lives you have remained in a state of forgetfulness, in a state of unconsciousness? Now suddenly you try to be aware. The weight of the past is too much. The chains of the past are too heavy. But they will be broken. All that is needed is perseverance and patience. And you have to be very, very intelligent about it. Otherwise, my observation is people try to remember, and when they cannot, they start feeling very guilty. That too is part of your habits. If you cannot do something, you immediately start feeling guilty. And if you feel guilty, it will be more difficult to remember. If you feel frustrated, sooner or later you will stop the very effort of remembering. Be intelligent. Seeing that for many lives you have not remembered yourself, it is natural that you forget. Even if you can remember for a few moments, feel grateful. Feel thankful. You are doing the impossible. A little intelligence is needed, otherwise the so-called religious people, rather than becoming religious, become simply guilt-ridden, become repentant, start feeling about themselves as if they are condemned, as if they are not the chosen one, as if God has thrown them into the dark night and has forgotten about them. As if it may have happened to a Buddha or a Kabir or a Krishna or a Zarathustra, but it is not going to happen to them. They were special people. That's why it happened to them. They were already born enlightened. That's why it happened to them. It can't happen to me. I am an ordinary person. Just to avoid remembering, people have created all kinds of theories. Hindus say Krishna is an incarnation of God. Christians say Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. Mind you, the only begotten. And all others are bastards. The Jainas say Mahavira is a Tirthankara. very special. Not an ordinary soul. Not even an ordinary body. Mahavira does not perspire. He is not an ordinary human being. He does not defecate or urinate, no. He is not an ordinary being. He is very special. His body is special. Jesus is born out of a virgin mother. He is not an ordinary mortal. Even his birth is special. And so on and so forth. Every religion has created these theories. And on the surface it looks that you are paying great respect to Mahavira, Krishna, Buddha. You are not. In fact, you are simply trying to avoid remembering yourself. You are saying they are special and we are not. So they can remember, they can realize, they can become enlightened. We cannot. This is a very political strategy, but very unintelligent. This is how you are preventing yourself from becoming enlightened. Nobody is special, or everybody is special. Nobody is an incarnation of God, or everybody is an incarnation of God. Choose any. But don't make few people special. That is the trick. And that is a very stupid trick. Because of it, you have not remembered yet who you are. Be a little more intelligent. You have not remembered up to now because you have not decided to remember, that's all. Now you decide to remember. Jnanadeva, this decision to remember is going to create many, many problems for you. Forgetfulness is easy, habitual, has become second nature. Now you are going against your habits. The habits will create every kind of hindrance, obstacle. Only for moments you will be able to pull yourself out of your habits, and they will drag you again back into the old mire. But don't be worried. If it is possible even for a single moment to remember, it is possible to remember. That one moment is enough proof. And that one moment will give you such joy and such freedom that you cannot relapse back into forgetfulness forever. But don't make much fuss about it. If you forget, natural, accept it. If you remember, that is something great to rejoice in. Rather than repenting for forgetfulness, rejoice in being able to remember. Just a little intelligence. The Irish paratroop trainees were flying out for their first parachute jump after several weeks training. Remember, lads, said the instructor, El Geronimo, jump out, count to 8, and then pull your rip cord. The door opened at 10,000 feet. All the lads jumped out one by one, and Paddy went last. The instructor shut the door, and the plane flew down and landed. The instructor got out and saw Paddy frantically clutching the plane's wing. What the hell do you think you are doing? Yelled the instructor. Sorry, sir, said Paddy, but I forgot the name of that bleeding Indian. That Geronimo. It is not the name of any bloody Indian. It is just an exclamation. Hallelujah. And it is irrelevant too. The whole point is that after counting to 8, you pull your rip card. And after counting to 8 is also not to be followed literally. You can count to 10, you can count to 6, that will do. Don't become too much unintelligent in what you are doing, particularly when you are moving towards inward consciousness. Remember, everything is just a formal support. Anything can be of help. For example, you are sitting here. You can just remember and you can use these words, I am here. And feel it. I am here. Just not the words, but the existential feel. I am here. And a sudden remembering, a witnessing. Repeat it whenever you want to remember, I am here. And then slowly, when you have become capable to remember, I am here, and it has become a feel in you, not just words in the head, but in the guts. You can feel I am here. Then drop the word here. Then simply say I am. And that will do. And that will do far better. Just I am. And the great remembrance. And the great light. And the great rooted feeling in existence. But don't become attached to the words. When you have become capable of remembering I am, drop the I. Then simply use the word am. Whenever you want to remember, just say am. But that too has to be dropped finally. These are not mantras to be repeated. These are just simple devices. Then drop am too. Then simply remember without using any words. You can give just a small shrug, a nudge, and remember. Then even the nudge should be dropped. All devices have to be dropped, because the human tendency is to become more attached to the device than to the purpose. You say, Gyandeva, why do I go on forgetting myself? Because you have been living in forgetfulness for many lives. This may be your first chance to remember. There are people who have tried to remember in their past lives. When they come, it is easier for them. because nothing ever is last. If you have meditated in the past lives, all that you have done in those meditations will remain part of your being, and whenever you will meditate again, that energy will become available. But few people are meditating for the first time. Then it is a little more difficult, but not impossible. Take the challenge. Never feel repentant. Just rejoice in the positive that happens to you and never be worried about the negative. Accept the negative as it is and rejoice in the positive. And the positive will go on growing, and the negative will be reduced on its own account. The third question: Bhagwan, I live in the world of the conditional. Could, should, would, may, might, and if are my dream operatives, which only my mind accomplishes, usually in the past tense. Why am I so secure in this illusion? Bhagavati, one can be secure only in an illusion. Because security is the greatest illusion there is. Life is insecure. Love is insecure. To be is to be in insecurity. To be is to be in constant danger. Only dead are secure, because they cannot die anymore. Nothing can ever happen to them now. The more alive you are, the more insecure you are. Hence, many people have decided not to be alive, because a kind of deadness gives security, protection, armor. Many people have decided not to look into reality, because reality is insecure. I cannot do anything. You cannot do anything about it. It is how it is. Reality is insecure. One never knows what is going to happen in the next moment. I may be here, I may not be here. You may be here, you may not be here. The next breath may come in, may not come. The person who loves you tomorrow may simply forget all about you. That's how life is. So we have created illusions to hide ourselves behind the illusions, so we need not see the insecurity of life. Marriage is an illusion. Love is a reality. Love is insecure. Nobody knows whether tomorrow it is going to be there or not. It is like a breeze. When it comes, it comes. When it is gone, it is gone. You cannot manipulate it. You cannot control it. You cannot predict it. But the mind is very much afraid. If tomorrow your woman leaves you, what you are going to do? How you will be ever able to live without her? You have become so much dependent on her. You cannot conceive yourself without her. So make some arrangements. Close the doors, close the windows, lock everything so she cannot escape. That's what marriage is. Making legal locks. So you cannot easily escape. You can go to the police. You can go to the court. You can harass the woman to come back. But when you close all the doors and all the windows, the woman is no more the same as she was when she was under the sky, under the stars. She is no more the same. The bird on the wing is a totally different phenomenon than the bird in the cage. The bird in the cage is no more the same bird, because it has no more the same sky, the same freedom. It is imprisoned. Its soul is killed. It only appears alive. Its wings are cut. It only appears that it is. Now it will only vegetate. Without freedom there is no life. But one thing is good about the cage, it has security. Now the bird needs not be worried about food. Tomorrow morning he is going to be fed as usual. He need not worry about the enemies, the predators. Nobody can attack him. The bird may think he is not caged but protected. He may think these iron bars are not enemies but friends. He may start loving them. Even if one day you want him to make free, he may not like the very idea. He may resist. He may not go even if you open the door. He will say, I am not going. How can I leave my security? He has forgotten all the joy of freedom. Now he only remembers the comfort and the convenience of security. Marriage is a cage. Love is the open sky. We have destroyed love and created the illusion of marriage. It is ugly. Two persons together out of love is one thing, and two persons together because of the law is totally different. Their souls are no more together. Only their bodies are tethered together. Because they cannot escape, because the escape seems to be too costly. And the children are there, and all the comforts of family life and the home. They decide to remain a slave. They decide not to live, but just to exist. And then, of course, people have many kinds of illusions of the past, of the future. Bhagavati, you are not alone in it. Every human being is in the same boat. Because we cannot live in the present, it is dangerous to live in the present. Because to live in the present means to be authentic. We live in the past. We live in the future. Past and future are very easy, comfortable. No danger. You can manipulate your past. You can control it. You can order your past. Your past is very obedient. It is non-existential. It exists only in your memory. You can arrange it again and again. Hence, one of the greatest psychological insights is that up to now, no autobiography has been written. Millions have been written, but they are all untrue. to write an autobiography seems to be almost impossible. Because you always go on arranging your memories. When you look back, it is not the real past that you are looking. It is no more there. Just your memory of it. And in the memory also you choose. First you choose while you are experiencing something. 1,001 things are happening every day, but you choose only few. Scientists say only 2%. 98% is not chosen. Only 2%. All that feels good to you, ego enhancing, gratifying, you choose. All that seems like suffering, pain, all that hurts, you don't choose. Your memory is a choice first, and then each time you remember it, your experiences are growing. And your experiences go on being reflected in your memories. You go on giving them new colors. You go on painting them again and again. So many quotes that by the time you write your autobiography, and people write autobiographies only when they know that they are dead. When they know now nothing more is going to happen, then they write autobiographies. When a person is alive, how can he write his autobiography? When he thinks that everything is finished, I have lived, the full point has come. Now there is nothing else to happen. Then he writes. Now he looks back, paints all the memories as he wants them to be. All autobiographies are fiction. My suggestions to the librarians is all autobiographies should be counted as fiction and should be categorized as fiction. They are fiction and nothing else. You magnify things which you would like, and unconsciously you add many things which have never happened. And I am not saying that you are cheating knowingly. No. You may believe. Just start telling a lie, and after 10 years you will be suspicious whether it was a lie or a truth. A journalist died. He knocked on the doors of heaven. Saint Peter opened the door and said, "Sorry." Are you a journalist? Because it is very difficult to miss a journalist. He looks from his very face, from his eyes. And the man said, "Yes, but how did you recognize?" He said, "It is very difficult to miss a journalist. But I am sorry, we don't have any place for journalists anymore in heaven. The quota is full. We have only 12 journalists. Even those are just useless, because nothing ever happens in heaven. Nothing worth reporting. Nothing like news." You know the definition of news George Bernard Shaw has given. When a man bites a dog, it is news. Not when a dog bites a man. That is not news. That is nothing. In heaven, news does not happen. No newspaper is published. Even those 12 journalists are just useless. So what do we need you for? You go to hell. And there is news and news and news. Nothing else ever happens there. Everything is in news. And there are many, many papers. And great is their circulation. You go there, you will have good job. But the journalist said, no. I cannot go. Can't you manage in some way? If you give me 24 hours time, I can convince some other journalist to go to hell, and in his vacant place, you can allow me in. Peter said, that's okay. 24 hours given. You go in. The journalist entered with all his journalistic acumen, skill. He started a rumor. Whosoever he came across, he said, have you listened? A big newspaper is going to be started in hell. And all the posts are vacant. The chief editor and the assistant chief editor and other assistants and this and that. Whomsoever he met, he told that. After 24 hours when he reached back, Saint Peter would not open the door. He said, you cannot get out. You have to be in. He said, but what is the matter? Saint Peter said, all the 12 has left. Now at least, just for the name's sake, one journalist, you be in. The journalist said, I can't be in now anymore. Let me go. There must be something in the news. How 12 persons can believe if there is nothing in it? It can't be just a rumor. There must be some truth in it. Maybe a fragment, but there must be some truth in it. I cannot remain anymore. Open the door. Let me go. If you start a lie, sooner or later you will believe in it. In fact, before others believe in it, you will believe in it. And after 10 years it will be difficult whether it was a lie. After 10 years it will be difficult whether you had dreamed about it or you had really lived the thing. Your dreams and your life will got mixed, will become mixed into each other. It is very difficult to write an autobiography. It has not yet been done. And I don't think it can ever be done. Those who can write, they don't write. A Buddha can write. But he says he has no autobiography to write. He says, I was never born. He says, I have never uttered a single word. He says, I never became enlightened because I was never unenlightened. He says, I never died because nothing ever dies. So what autobiography? There is no self, so what autobiography? There is no ego. There is no center. So what about the circumference? No circumference is possible. A Buddha can write, but he will not write. And others who write are bound to write fictions. You go on living in the past. It is very comfortable. You are the master. About your past, you are the master. You can do anything you want to do with the past. And about the future also, you are the master. You can become the president of America or India in the future. You can do anything that you want, and everybody does something. Just sitting silently, you start imagining that passing by the side of the road, you have found a bag full of money. And not only that, you start planning how to use that money. You start purchasing things. You are the masters. Past and future give you the idea that you are a king. The present takes all illusions away. The present simply reveals your naked truth. And the present reveals the insecurity that life is. Because life implies death. And everything that is implies that it cannot be forever. Everything that is going to be non-existential sooner or later. The flower that has bloomed in the morning is beautiful. By the evening it will be gone. The petals will wither away. And tomorrow you will not find even a trace of it. That's how real life is. Changing, moving, dynamic, nothing is static, nothing permanent, always in a flux. Bhagavati, that's why not only you but everybody starts living in the past and the future to avoid the present and its dangers. Friedrich Nietzsche is right. He says, live dangerously. In fact, there is no other way to live. One can only live dangerously. The other way is of avoiding life, not of living. And that's what sannyas is all about. It is to accept the insecurity of life. It is to accept death. It is to accept that everything can disappear any moment. Your love, your friendship, you. Everything is only for the moment. Next moment, the petals will wither away. All will be gone. Knowing this and yet rejoicing, that's what sannyas is all about. Knowing this and yet dancing. Knowing this and yet a song on your lips. Knowing this and yet a joy in your eyes. In fact, this insecurity is beautiful. This insecurity has a blessing in it. Because if everything is secure, there will be no life at all. If everything is secure, there will be rocks and rocks. No flowers, no birds, no people. If everything is secure, there may be notes, mathematics, science, but no poetry, no music, no dance. The world will be a dead world, phony, plastic. The real world has to be in a constant danger. That danger adds to its beauty. That danger gives it depth. That danger makes it challenging. Bhagavati, come out of your security and of your illusions. You say, I live in the world of the conditional. The world of the conditional is the world of the mind. The true world is unconditional. You cannot make any conditions on the truth. And truth never makes any conditions on you. Neither you can make conditions on God, nor God ever makes any conditions on you. All is given unconditionally. You say, I live in the world of the conditional. That means you don't live. You only pretend. You say, I live in could, should, would, may, might, and if. These are the words which belong to the world of death, not to the world of life. Life simply is, it knows nothing of should, could, would. Life simply is, it knows nothing of may, might. Life simply is, it knows nothing of ifs and buts. Live that which is, and whatsoever it is. Yes, sometimes it hurts and hurts very much. Sometimes it brings great agonies. But those agonies are the stepping stones to ecstasies. And those hurts are nothing but birth pain. You have to accept the day and the night, birth and death, summer and winter. You have to accept all that life is. You cannot reject anything. You cannot make conditions on it. Your conditions won't make any difference. They will only drown you into your own illusions. Live in the is. The word art is a mind construction. Avoid it. You say, why am I so secure in this illusion? One can be secure only in illusions. So there is no question of why. If you find somebody secure, you can be certain he must be living in illusions. But insecurity has tremendous beauty. You have not tasted of it. You have become too much accustomed of the dirty pool of water, stagnant, stinking. You have forgotten the beauty of a river, constantly flowing from the known to the unknown, from the limited to the unlimited. I have to revive your memory of it. It is a remembering. Because one day you had known it. When the child is born, he knows nothing of security. He knows nothing of past, nothing of future. He simply lives in the is. We drive him out of the is. That's what we call the process of civilizing a child. That's what we call education. Driving out from the is. Taking him out from life's naturalness and making him arbitrary and artificial. By the age 3 or 4, a child becomes part of society. He loses all contact with God and reality. So you had known one day what it means to be in insecurity. All that I need is to remind you, to provoke that remembrance in you. And once you have again tasted it, you will drop all your illusions. And you will start moving into the unknown with all its insecurity. And not that you will feel frightened, you will feel thrilled. You will feel that insecurity is not something wrong, but is the root of all adventure. Insecurity is not something against you, but is the very possibility of your existence. It sharpens your intelligence. It keeps you alive, alert. It keeps you always mystified. It keeps you in a state of constant surprise. Insecurity is beautiful, and the day you know insecurity is beautiful, you have known the wisdom of insecurity. And you have understood the very core of sannyas. The fourth question, Bhagwan, I am a staunch Catholic. Nobody can shake my beliefs. But why I feel a little frightened here? Alexander, you have fallen in a wrong company. Escape from here as fast as possible. Because you are already shaken. A belief has no roots. It is just an imposed phenomenon. Howsoever staunchly you believe in it, it makes no difference. In fact, the more you are afraid of losing it, the more staunchly you believe in it. Whenever somebody says, this is my strong belief, know well that he is afraid. Otherwise, what does it mean? Why he should brag about his staunchness? If he knows, he knows. You know that the sun has risen, that it is day. You don't say, I strongly believe that this is sunrise. You simply say, I know this is sunrise. You don't say, I strongly believe. Nobody can shake my belief. If you say it, people will think you are crazy. If you say it, people will think you must be blind. You are not seeing the sun. You have only heard about it. Others must have told you. And you are saying, I believe it strongly. Just to protect yourself, you create a great armor around yourself. But a real experience needs no protection. The real experience needs no bragging of being staunch. One simply knows or one knows not. Things are very simple. You say, I am a staunch Catholic. It is just accidental that you were born in a Catholic house. If you were born and brought up by a Hindu, you would have been a staunch Hindu. And if you were born in Soviet Russia and you were brought up by a communist, you would have been a staunch communist. Staunchness would have remained the same. Otherwise, everything would have been different. That staunchness simply shows that you are not intelligent. An intelligent person does not believe. He tries to know. He inquires. An intelligent person is neither Catholic nor Protestant. An intelligent person is neither Hindu nor Mohammedan. An intelligent person says that I don't know yet, so how can I claim? what is right and what is wrong. How can I say that the Bible is right and the Quran is wrong, or vice versa? The intelligent person is bound to say only one thing, that I don't know. And I cannot carry any prejudice if I really want to know. He remains unprejudiced, open. By being a Catholic, you are closed. By being a Jaina, you are closed. By being a Buddhist, you are closed. You are not an inquirer. You are not a seeker. You don't love truth. You love security. Belief gives you security. And if you want to know the truth, you have to begin with agnosticism. You have to begin from the state of not knowing. Every true inquiry starts only in not knowing. One has to be clearly aware that I don't know, but I have to seek, I have to search, I have to find. And I should start without any a priori conception. That's why you are becoming a little afraid, frightened. You may not have landed in such a society before. These people are dangerous. Don't tell me later on that I didn't give you the warning. Alexander, you please escape. You don't seem to be much of an Alexander either. And certainly, you are not in good company. Have you heard this story about Ferreira, the flyer, during World War II? He had never shot down a British plane, and everybody in the squadron kidded him about it. One day, while on patrol, Ferreira spotted 5 British transport planes. He zipped into their formation and shot down all 5. Now he could not wait to tell his fellow pilots. Ferreira landed quickly, jumped out of his plane, and rushed over to a colonel standing beside a map table. I just shoot down 5 British transports, shouted the proud Italian. I say, bad luck, old chap, replied the officer. You are in a wrong place. Old chap, you should not have landed here. You say, nobody can shake my beliefs. But why do you say it? Why in the first place the idea comes to your mind? I had not asked. Nobody has asked. Nobody can shake my beliefs. You are already shaking inside. I can see you trembling. And it is natural because you know that you don't know. That those beliefs are just borrowed by you from others. The priests have told you. And you have believed. You have believed because you were not really interested in truth. So you said, okay. You were not really caring enough about truth. So you said, okay. People are so uncaring about truth that they say, whatsoever you say, it must be right. Who cares? I am not so much interested to bother. That's the situation in the world. Few are Christians, few are Hindus, few are Mohammedans. If you look deeply into them, you will see that they don't care whether God is or is not, what truth is. They have simply accepted the belief that the people around them believe. It is a formal social security. It feels good to be part of the crowds. It feels good that others think that you are religious. You are not religious. It is not easy to be religious. It is one of the dangerous adventures, the most dangerous adventure of life, to be religious. It means dropping all the beliefs and going into the unknown without any maps. It is good if you allow us to destroy our beliefs. It is good and will be healthy for you if you don't cling to your beliefs. And something seems to have started. You say, but why? I feel a little frightened here. You have started becoming alert that your Catholicism is phony. There has been only one Christian, and he was crucified on the cross. Since then, there has not been any Christian. In fact, be a Christ, don't be a Christian. Don't disrespect yourself by being a Christian. You are meant to be a Christ. You are meant to be a Buddha, not to be a Buddhist. What is a Buddhist compared to being a Buddha? Just a believer, not a seeker, not an inquirer. Go on the voyage. The sea is calling you. Go alone and go without maps and without scriptures. And if you can drop all your scriptures and maps and ideologies on this bank, the other bank is not far away. The man who is utterly empty of knowledge is immediately worthy to receive from God the ultimate gift of knowing. Only those who renounce knowledge become capable of knowing. The seventh question, Bhagwan, what do you mean when you say meditate over it? Please explain it in relation to my problem of jealousy. Vitgyan. When I say meditate over it, I don't mean think over it. I don't mean concentrate over it. I don't mean contemplate over it. When I say meditate over it, I mean watch. Be a witness. Whatsoever the problem, anger, sexuality, jealousy, greed, ego, whatsoever the problem is, the medicine is the same. If you suffer from jealousy, Just watch how it arises in you, how it grabs you, how it surrounds you, clouds you, how it tries to manipulate you, how it drags you into paths where you never wanted to go in the first place, how finally it creates great frustration in you, how it destroys your energy, dissipates your energy, and leaves you very negatively depressed, frustrated. Just watch the whole thing and remember not to condemn, because if you condemn, you have started thinking. I am not saying that condemn it. Just see the facticity of it. Without condemnation, without appreciation, without any judgment for or against, just watch, aloof, distant, as if you have nothing to do with it. Be very scientific in watching. One of the most important scientific contribution to the world is non-judgmental observation. When a scientist is experimenting, he simply experiments without any judgment, without any conclusion. If he has a conclusion already in his mind, that means he is not a scientist. His conclusion will influence the experiment. One man has written a book. In America, people are very much superstitious and afraid of the number 13. Even in the hotels, you will not find number 13 room. After 12 comes 14, because nobody wants to stay in the 13th room. You will not find the 13th floor even. The whole floor missing. After 12th, the 14th. Because who will want to stay at the 13th floor? One man has written a book, collected thousands of facts, that this is not a superstition, this is a truth. He has collected all the people who have committed suicide on the date 13th. Of course, millions of people commit suicide on 13th, as much as on 12th, as much as on 14th. But he collects only about 13th. And many people commit suicide from the 13th floor. And many people commit suicide in the 13th number room. And many things happen in the world. Things are continuously happening. This man had brought his thesis to show me. And I told him, you have really done a great job. He says, I have been working at it almost for 5 years. Millions of facts he has gathered. He said, now who can say this is superstition? I said, you do one thing more. It will take 5 years again. Now you try to find out about number 12. He has already a conclusion that 13th number is wrong. Something is evil about it. With that idea, he has chosen. And I said, do one thing more. After you are finished with number 12, then 5 years more you will have to do another experiment. Find out how many good things happen on number 13th. 13th number room, 13th story. of the hotel, 13th day of the month. Find out how many good things happen. Only then your conclusion can be of any scientific value. You are already prejudiced. A Hindu psychologist, Dr. Banerjee, came to see me once. He said, I am trying to scientifically prove that rebirth is a fact and not a hypothesis. I asked him, Dr. Banerjee, you say you are trying to scientifically prove? He said, yes. I said, but if you are trying to prove scientifically something, you should not have any conclusion beforehand. You have already accepted the Hindu idea of rebirth. You are working as a Hindu, not as a scientist. He was so angry because he had come to me to support his belief. I said, I am not saying anything against your belief. I am not saying whether rebirth is a fact or not. All I am saying is this, that don't bring science in it. If you bring science in it, then the fundamental law of science is be an unprejudiced, non-judgmental observer without any a priori conclusion. A priori conclusions make you believers, not scientists. When I say meditate over it, I mean watch. Be a scientist in your inner world. Let your mind be your lab and you observe. With no condemnation, remember, don't say jealousy is bad. Who knows? Don't say anger is bad. Who knows? Yes, you have heard, you have been told. But that's what others say. This is not your experience. And you have to be very existential, experiential. Unless your experiment proves you are not to say yes or no to anything. You have to be utterly non-judgmental. And then watching jealousy is a miracle. Or anger, or sex. What happens when you watch without any judgment? You start seeing through and through. Jealousy becomes transparent. You see the stupidity of it. You see the foolishness of it. Not that you have already decided that it is stupid. If you have decided, you will miss the whole point. Remember it. I am not saying decide it is stupid, it is foolish. If you decide, you miss the whole point. You simply go without any decision, just to see what exactly it is. What is this jealousy? What is this energy called jealousy? And watch it as you watch a rose flower. Just see into it. When there is no conclusion, your eyes are clear. The clarity is attained only by those who have no conclusions. Watch, see into it, and it will become transparent, and you will come to know that it is stupid. And knowing its stupidity, it drops on its own accord. You don't need to drop it. Mrs. Westman had her portrait painted. When it was finished, the artist presented it to her. How do you like it? He asked. It is nice, answered Mrs. Westman. But I want you should add a gold bracelet on each wrist, a pearl necklace, ruby earrings, an emerald tiara, and on each finger I want you to put a 20-carat diamond ring. But said the bewildered artist, why do you want to ruin a good picture with all those gaudy trinkets? My husband is running around with a young chippy, explained Mrs. Wesman, and when I die, I want her to go crazy looking for the jewelry. Just look into your jealousy and you will see how it drives you crazy. Seeing it, sanity arises. Just seeing it. I am not saying renounce jealousy. Those who say renounce jealousy, they don't understand a thing. I am saying look, watch, meditate. And if it is stupid, it will drop. Because how can you carry anything stupid with yourself? But its stupidity has to be your own experience. If it is not your own, then you will only repress. You will condemn. You will not look into it. You will throw it into the basement of your unconscious. And there it will boil. And there it will grow. And the growth is more dangerous. Because it will be growing underground. It will become a canceric growth. It will spread all over your life. And you will wait simply for the opportunity. It will explode sooner or later. Any day, it will explode. And it will destroy you. Paddy and his two friends, an Englishman and a Scotsman, got sentenced to 5 years in jail, but were told that they could have one thing with them that they badly wanted. The Englishman had a big blonde, the Scotsman had bottles of whiskey, and Paddy chose packets and packets of cigarettes. 5 years came and they were all let out one by one. The Englishman came out with his blonde, looking absolutely knackered. The Scotsman came out staggering all over and hiccuping. And last of all, out came Paddy, of course, looking very frustrated. And do you know what his first words were? Have you got a light, anybody? Enough for today.